If you are a sim who's experienced life in Pleasant View or any of its surrounding neighborhoods during the early 2010s, then the songs I'm about to cover might be very familiar to you. This was an era of rapid growth and innovation in the Simlish music scene. This was when Simlish universal mega hit Chocolate was dropped. It was when humans like Katy Perry and Lily Allen were dropping Simlish versions of their tunes to capitalize on the craze. This was a time when your omnipresent music industry would drop batches of songs organized by genre, 2 genres at a time every few months. This was a time when Electronic Arts actually granted enough time and resources for their creatives to produce something fun and artistically significant. Feels like a different lifetime, but in the mid-2000s, EA totally nailed it by going all in on building this hilarious and addictive alternate universe. I've covered some insane video game soundtracks over the past few years, but The Sims 2 features what I now consider to be one of the most innovative compositional processes in modern gaming history. And no doubt there are people who still sing these songs today as if they were dropped on MTV. For these reasons and more, I'd like to explore the alternate reality music scene of The Sims 2, find out who its major artists and producers are, chart the explosive growth of non-Simlish music translations in the late 2000s, and give credit to some of the incredible independent contractor musicians who were a part of this wild achievement. Allow me to introduce you to the much-lauded, award-winning TV and film composer Mark Mothersbaugh. This video is not about his brilliant music for The Sims 2, which you would hear if you were the user building your Sims world from afar. Mark's music is closer to what we call underscore, which is the music which supplements the scene for the audience to enjoy. This music is non-diegetic, meaning it doesn't exist in the reality the Sims are living in. Unfortunately, they don't seem to be aware of Mark's music. Diegetic music is heard by the characters within the work of fiction, like when the Howdy Doody theme plays at Doc Brown's house in Back to the Future, or this group playing jazz standards in the back of a Police Squad episode, or even Mickey in Steamboat Willie. In the case of The Sims 2 though, the concept of diegetic music was taken to a whole new level, and the characters populating this simulated game world are treated to a shockingly full menu of original in-game radio station songs made just for them. Just to be clear about it, in the game as a Sim, you can turn on the radio and choose one of these stations for yourself. I'm sure plenty of people just did not, but there also exists this possibility to dive in a world of airwaves filled with Simlish tunes. And some of these songs are of pretty incredible quality. The absolute hit single of the 2000 Sim universe is an alt-rock pop rager called Chocolate. This song perfectly encapsulates the simultaneously shiny and grungy optimism of the early 2000s. It's mainly a wall of strumming guitars riffing on a 1-5-4 progression with some lead lines tossed in at points. The vocals are bright and flawless, and it's actually impressively mixed. The drum part is perfect and catches all the major hits while being simple enough to just keep all the momentum. And like every single other song the residents of the Simverse get to hear, the lyrics for this one are in Simlish. So let's take a medium depth dive into Simlish. From what is publicly known and compiled about Simlish, the language seems to primarily be a reshuffling of English phonemes, designed to sound more or less like gibberish, which carries the right emotion. Yet, although there are barely any constructed elements to the language, that doesn't mean it's improvised, or that it was just haphazardly thrown together. The uncanny utterances of Simlish were actually very thoughtfully crafted. Apparently the idea to produce a garbled English variant wasn't the first that the sound team tried. The game designers and sound team of the original Sims tried creating this language for the first game, knowing they needed to create some type of audio to accompany these simulated people when they spoke. They needed to talk to each other, and they needed to clearly show us that they were talking to each other, and even generally what they were saying. And I definitely agree that normal English wouldn't be very fun, and might even just come across as disingenuous. An awesome article by The Verge chronicles this team's early efforts and frustrations when it came to the language build. Among the early ideas was essentially to do the Charlie Brown adults thing and represent their words with various instruments, but it doesn't seem like they were too impressed by that. They apparently even tried more obscure variants of existing languages, so that there was at least some kind of structure, but I guess that also just didn't hit right. After toiling away at these various drafts of Simlish, they were eventually driven to the insanity it takes to start speaking convincing gibberish into the mic. It was time for voice actors Stephen Kieran and Jerry Lawler to construct a language born solely from standard English syllables and the emotions they are meant to convey. And I really do mean the emotional part. They were shown movements and events from The Sims, and then they would spend take after take trying to perfectly capture the essence of that moment into a moment of Simlish. The story of creating this language is surprisingly beautiful and profound, and although it's still primarily nonsense, There are some clear-cut rules and definitions which have taken shape over the years. There are at least a couple reference sources you can find online related to Simlish. According to a doctoral researcher named Emma J. Merritt, Simlish contains basically the same phonotactics as English. Some notable traits of Simlish include a tendency for the primary stress to be on the last syllable, a lack of a th sound referred to as a dental phoneme. There even exists a Simlish dictionary accessible online which contains at least some words and brief phrases of known Simlish English translation. However, it's not very extensive, and to the best of my knowledge, Simlish was never intended to become a fully fledged language anyway, simply something that held up after hours of gameplay while still feeling emotive and natural. So, in the end, after cross-referencing what I heard from the lyrics with what I could find online of the language, it does not appear there is much in the way of actual lyrical content or meaning to the lyrics at all in Chocolate. According to some of the musicians who recorded the vocals for this game, EA actually sent them what amounted to a gibberish coach to head on site and make sure their lyrics were indistinguishable enough. I'm guessing the vast majority of the songs at this stage in the Sims franchise just have no particular translation into English. Consequently, vocalist Serena Witters probably didn't directly translate a story word for word into Simlish for the song. I would guess she worked with the composers to create something simple but unfamiliar, which takes from previously established sounds of the language. And in fact, it might just be more fun that the user can essentially piece together their own custom lyrics from these syllables. There are plenty of ways you can combine all of the phonemes into different words, and I'm guessing many players have memorized entirely different versions of these over the years. One last thing I think is worth noting is that EA apparently has their own Simlish dictionary, which they keep under wraps and only distribute to voice actors working on the series. I would doubt there's a whole ton more of Simlish structure and vocabulary past what the general public knows, but it is yet another fascinating piece of evidence that the Sims development team takes the language with some degree of seriousness. Now, from the YouTube plays alone, you can see that this song has become an absolutely beloved part of Sims music lore. It's catchy, fun, and quite frankly, no Simlish knowledge is needed to be infected by its fervent joy. And within the Sims verse, it's even been remixed and covered numerous times, and reintroduced back into the game through expansions by EA. So, if you were either a Sim or a Sim player at this time, this alternate reality music scene was being built before your eyes through physical CD drops, which delivered a fresh new wave of environments and features for your game along the way. Nearly each pack seems to have come with some new batch of music, so rather than having individual artists drop albums like a traditional music industry, the cigar-chomping execs of Simlish territory took the rather interesting approach of releasing chunks of their reality, grouped by shared stylistic elements. It does not seem to be all too common to cover or remix songs in the Sims verse, but Chocolate was apparently so transcendentally popular that it's received at least 2 new versions throughout the years. Here's a remix in the teen-style Stuff Pack, which provided a much-needed material drop for rebellious Sim kids. And there's even an acoustic version which made it into the Sims Pet Story soundtrack. To be honest, this one's not even just a throwaway acoustic version, it takes on a much more folk Americana bent, featuring fiddle lines and a shredding drummer with bundle sticks. If we zoom back in on the original Sims 2 music scene, there were 6 radio stations in existence: hip-hop, pop, salsa, techno, metal, and R&B. You can find Chocolate by tuning into the pop station, alongside other similar hits like 360, a similarly bubbly pop jam. The vanilla Sims 2 pop station seems to have 4 tunes overall, and generally most stations have about 4 to 6. And if my experience playing these games was anywhere close to the norm, players probably just became used to 1 or 2 stations and got to know those songs extremely well. I'm sure there are people who have literally been singing the Simlish words to these songs for close to 20 years. For some, these songs are no different than what you might find on a normal radio, and they're even made with enough production value to stand up to that comparison. These are just some people's literal childhood soundtrack. And for some lucky Sim rebels, their tuning of choice was this massive overachievement known as the metal station. Every metal tune in The Sims 2 is credited to a single man, John Cobbett. In a 2010 interview with Invisible Oranges, he made it clear that everything was recorded by him and his San Francisco-based Hammers of Misfortune bandmates, and that they were specifically instructed to make every song sound as though it came from a different metal band, which he accomplished by seemingly composing each tune like it was from a different subgenre within the metal umbrella. Somehow, every single tune on this station is unique, has insane amounts of character, highly detailed arrangements, and the absolute most incredible vocals in the Sims verse. And to be honest, I think as good as these elements are, the names might be the best part. So let's start with Turgid Apocalypse. Turgid? Turgid? As many a YouTube commenter point out, the metal screamo lyrics are a spark of true genius, and it's hilarious that they are almost no less distinguishable from what you'd hear live outside of the Sims verse. Monkey Failure seems like it's parodying late 80s Western metal Metallica before diving headfirst into true blast beat territory. Blast beats are the thing when the drummer just guns it between the snare and the bass drum super fast, and consistent enough to sound like a machine. Monkey Failure also has an unbelievable drum breakdown, which leads into this 6/8 section, and it kind of reminds me of Billy Reimer's fragmented drumming style from the Dillinger Escape Plan. Be a Good Child might be my favorite. The Simlish Screamo here is just unbelievable. We have another blast beat, and a few other neat unison arrangement tricks between sections. And to be honest, the guitar solo is pretty wild. Shut Me Out starts with more neat full band unison tricks and continues them later on in this bridge, which is dripping with monstrous metal sludge. And the sixth and final masterpiece for the metal station is yet another blast beat rager with crazy unison hits before the second section. Also, the way they seem to slow down right before this guitar solo is pretty hype. Another collection of high art you'll find browsing the Sims 2 radio stations is the R&B section. This stuff has so much soul, it's so funky, and especially the song Tonight is just bursting with all my favorite 2000s neo-soul tropes and chord progressions. Smooth is another classic from this station, where the vocalist is just extremely convincing as a Sim who knows nothing but writing R&B hits in Simlish. It's also sort of a masterclass in this style of part writing, where you're trying to keep things chill, but add funk with little keyboard parts here and there. And it just so happens that these two songs were created by the Simverse's Secret Weapon team of producers, a duo known as the Humble Brothers. These guys seem to be absolutely everywhere in the Simlish music industry, having even composed the aforementioned pop hits Chocolate and 360, whose vocals I assume are done by them. Not everything on the Sims 2 airwaves is theirs, but clearly this specific market is something they're very well suited for, and their work makes appearances across virtually all genres in the original release, and even spin-offs like Sims Bustin' Out. My personal favorite of theirs specifically might be the only title on the original disc which appears to be in Simlish. The Humble Brothers are actually a Canada-based duo who have been composing for various TV and game-related media for decades, and they were already in the EA pipeline prior to the Sims franchise launching. And that song even appears on Sims 2 radio as DJ Funktronic. Their work can even be spotted in the song Bonito over at the Salsa Station, which in its own right has epic notable tracks. Flipping the calendar ahead just slightly brings us to Sims University. Sims University was an expansion pack released by EA, which introduced the entire concept of young adulthood to the game series and allowed your Sims to experience college. To accompany the increasing size of their world, the Simlish music industry released their first major drop of two entire genres of music around this time: jazz, and a genre they refer to as college rock. That one specifically is Very Very Rich Town by a band called Go Betty Go, a pop-punk band out of LA which seems to have made it onto Warped Tour a couple times, and still seem to be active. The jazz is incredible, and I will talk about those musicians, but before we do, it must be noted that before this point, jazz already had a pretty special place in Sims lore, dating back to even before the Sims became playable themselves. All the way back in SimCity 3000, one of the many iterations of the world-building series which started the franchise, composer Jerry Martin made substantial use of jazz in order to create a bustling and lively sonic landscape that felt lived in. Among these early standards is a tune called Uptown Downtown. This one is sort of like a 16-bar blues with a 4-bar interlude vamp on the one, and the original does have solos performed by real instrumentalists. In keeping with the tradition of hiring actual jazz musicians to bring these to life, a Canadian trumpet player named Darren Johnston was hired to staff the band for Sims 2 University's bop sessions. These tunes are extremely tastefully done, each of them basically featuring a tight head and single chorus of solos down the line, never really exceeding the 5-minute mark in length. There's a blues, a ballad, something up-tempo, basically everything you'd expect from a talented quintet playing for a world of virtual inhabitants. Unfortunately, no Simlish on this, but the whole band does crush this session. The Sims 2 Nightlife introduced a series of old-school blues rock tunes, labeled as oldies, which don't immediately seem to have an artist credited to them. They're kinda cute. I wanted to mention them. And now we get to an absolutely seminal year in Sims 2 music lore. By the year 2006, the Simlish music scene was making so much of a name for itself that it began to attract non-Simlish speaking artists. Depeche Mode seems to be the first band which EA roped into re-recording a hit single of theirs into Simlish for The Sims 2, Suffer Well, a track released for the Sims 2 Open for Business expansion. In a press release related to this momentous occasion, EA lauds this as a collaboration between two celebrated entertainment icons. While Depeche Mode said at the time they were always open to new ways to share their music, and that the concept of re-recording their song in Simlish was so completely bizarre that they couldn't resist being part of it. This groundbreaking expansion even included a recording of an old new wave tune called Too Shy by the band Kajagoogoo, a Simlish version of a more modern new wave tune by Epoxies called Synthesized, and one more remake of a very interesting synth-funk tune called Things Can Only Get Better by British pop star Howard Jones. In 2006, EA was starting to operate like a literal record label, creating what you could call a music scene ARG with some of the world's most renowned performers. And these biannual expansion packs were kind of like new album drops each time. Later in 2006, after the smash success of OFB, EA released a few more simified pop tunes through their Pets expansion, including tunes by the Flaming Lips and the New Amsterdams, two behemoths of indie alternative stuff at the time. Before we move on to 2007, I do need to mention a Bluegrass station, which made it on through the Pets edition. I mean, it looks like it's referred to as the country station, but this seems to more specifically be a series of 6 tunes within the Bluegrass umbrella, which feature absolutely incredible musicianship. The one credited for putting these tracks together is the late great Dix Bruce, who passed in 2023 after an extensive career educating players of a variety of guitar-like instruments which you can find in Bluegrass. For those who don't know, Bluegrass music is a folk Americana shredfest, featuring a near continuous cascade of 8th and 16th notes played by acoustic instruments like mandolins and fiddles. These performers just lay it down in perhaps the most technically impressive series of instrumental solos in the entire franchise. In 2007, EA possibly dropped the most stacked album in Simlish history with The Sims Seasons, including Lily Allen's Simlish version of Smile, and offerings from jam bands like Government Mule and String Cheese Incident. Even the Veronicas joined the party with a personal favorite of mine. The Simlish music scene grew so popular around this time, EA even held a competition wherein contestants were asked to upload their own Simlish cover of Lily Allen's Simlish cover of Smile. Believe it or not, one of their 2007 press releases claims that there was a winner for this named Nessa Pop, whose grand prize was being the vocalist for Teen Stuff's remix of Chocolate. The Simlish translation craze continued on into 2007, with The Sims 2 Bon Voyage featuring a new single from Damian Marley. And by the end of the year, EA had already acquired a karaoke company called Slingshot, then quickly made use of its resources to create something called The Sims on Stage, an online Simlish karaoke environment for superfans. By 2008, The Sims verse was attracting the likes of Natasha Bedingfield and They Might Be Giants to throw in some Simlish singles on The Sims 2 free time. And by their final expansion pack, we reach this absolutely insane lineup of bands making their Simlish debut, including Good Charlotte, Tally Hall, and Katy Perry hit the Sims scene by dropping a version of Hot and Cold for The Sims 2 Apartment Life. At this point, there were a critical mass of relevant musicians actually taking part in this, and EA had a surprising amount of cultural relevance on their hands. Katy Perry would even stay involved, and they would make an entire expansion pack for The Sims 3, which revolved around her. All in all, we might have a triple-digit number of bands which lent their songs to the Simsverse since 2006, a phenomenon which is still carried on by the current iteration. By the end of 2009, Sims on Stage was closed, with the curt email simply thanking users for making it fun. The Sims development team was already starting to shift resources to their next major venture, The Sims 3. And this specific alternate reality was starting to take its final shape, the one we now study today. Yet, even though EA packed up and shifted their operation to slightly more updated pastures and a new generation of consoles, there is still an active player base for The Sims 2, to this day. As is often the case when a company like this leaves a content void, that void was soon filled by a dedicated modding community, which still seemingly releases new content. There's honestly so much to unpack about the audio of the Simverse, both musically and linguistically. But to me, this second soundtrack is the most impressive and special, in large part because so much of it had just never been done before. It's equal parts impressive and hilarious, my absolute favorite combination. You would think that there's no way to take Simlish seriously, but it turns out the voice actors and the musicians really did. The developers put such a big part of themselves into this game, and it really seems to have been a collaboration between EA's sound team, tons of like-minded musicians, and a corporate entity which actually endorsed something different and weird, and it turned out to be a hit. Thanks for checking this one out, and I hope you have a dope week.